We're to the first tee. Nobody cares about this, but I love when I have on a blue jean jacket. They're so comfortable. But anyways, sorry, that was so random. We are in this is episode 4 of the series. If you have not watched the first episode, I will place it somewhere here. Or if you have not watched the second one or the third one, make sure you go watch those, because what we are doing is we are putting together my football pie. And my football pie has so many different parts that I wanted to break this up into a series to give a better understanding of how I look at football, how I assess teams, and really what I've been doing all season with my teams. So for those of you that are new here, welcome. If this is your first video, I want to encourage you that you might want to go watch some other videos to see what I'm talking about so some of this makes sense. However, if you have been waiting for this video and you're back for video 4, welcome. This is the first tee. This video is about tendencies. And one thing about tendencies that is a little bit hard to get a hold of or a little bit hard to understand is a lot of this stuff is not going to show up on the stat sheet per se. A lot of this stuff is going to come down to the eye test, what you see your team doing, and knowing a little bit about your team. So this is the tee. I am so happy that you're here. We're going to get to the other side of this so I can tell you all the different things about tendencies that I pay attention to that are a piece of my football pie. The tendencies is all about coaches and players. What are coaches' tendencies and what are players' tendencies? The one thing about this one that makes it a little bit complicated is a lot of this comes down to watching film and who is going to be prepared. The reason why I say that is if you are not watching film against your team, or if you don't do a little bit of research to figure out what team's tendencies are, this is going to be very hard for you. The one thing I think I do very well is look at tendencies in my teams. So how do I do that? I know who my coaches are. I know the coaching things that are going to happen, and I can kind of figure out where I stand in that regard. So in my opinion, the tendencies are all about the eye test. What are your eyes telling you? What are your eyes telling you that you continue to see that continue to pop up for you? For me, I have this perfect little sheet that I've started to put together that I can type up notes about all of my teams throughout the season. So I can see all of their tendencies as they're continuously popping up week after week after week. When we lose, I know what's going on. When we win, I know what's going on because I'm documenting it. But for those of you that are just trying to figure out your team or figuring out football, tendencies is going to be very important. It will save you a lot of heartache because there's a lot of things you will not expect your team to do because you will know that is not what your team does. The first thing I'm going to call out here is play calling. What type of play calling happens? Are you a team that blitzes a lot? Are you a team that runs the ball a lot? Are you a team that uses a lot of motion, Coach Sark? Are you a team that you don't know what the hell is going on, right? So like, what does the play calling look like? What can I expect from this team? I will be honest and say I started to notice the Steelers would run the ball on first down, run the ball on second down, and everybody knew they were throwing on third down and they weren't going to throw the ball far because we weren't going to throw the ball down the field. That is a tendency of play calling. The hardest thing about this part is it causes you to pay a little bit more attention to things you might not pay attention to. For example, if you start to notice that your team is going to run the ball on every first down, or if you begin to notice certain things that your coach is going to do, you have to use that and try to understand how that's going to make sense against opponents you're playing. This is how I put this into practice. When I am assessing my team, I always look at the tendencies of the team that we're going to play. So if I can look at the tendencies of a team we're going to play, and I can see what my team usually does well, it helps me to make sense of what is going on. A great example of this is going back to the perspectives that I had in my P video. And in that video, I was talking about you have to start noticing the trends and you have to start noticing the tendencies. That is where this pops up. If I know my team's strength and the play calling of my team is going to be, we're going to run the ball, but I know the team I'm about to play, their tendencies are to play really against the run, really good against the run, I know I have an issue because I know what the players are going to do and I know the coaches that I have on my team. Does that make sense? Again, like I said at the beginning of this, the tendencies, in my opinion, is one of the hardest things to grasp because there is like intangibles. I can't go look at statistics as easy as I can in this because you have to kind of know what you're looking at. So for me, in all the videos that I will have, this section, in my opinion, on tendencies is going to be one of the hardest to quantify based on all the moving parts because it depends on the coaches and what the coaches do, and it depends on the players and how the players perform. The other big part of this is understanding your team's tendencies. So when you are looking at your team, you have to know what your team usually does. An example of this, do you have a quarterback who usually takes sacks when they don't need to take sacks? That is going to be an issue. Are you a team that gives up a ton of rushing yards? Are you a team that has a bend but don't break defense? Are you a team that has a very, very, very good defense? Are you a team that can't manage a clock? What does your coaching staff usually do? To me, this is understanding what happens usually in your teams during games. The tendencies are very hard to understand in week one because it's week one and you don't know what your coach is going to do. However, if you understand the history of what your coach usually does, these tendencies make sense. Let me give you a good example of this. If I'm thinking about Coach Sark, there's some things I know about Coach Sark. I know that my team struggles in the red zone. So if I am assessing my team and I am saying, okay, do we have the opportunity to beat Missouri? Okay, yes, but I'm going to keep in mind one thing I'm going to be looking at is our red zone conversion rate because I know we struggle with that. The other thing about my team's tendencies is I know my team, Texas, hook 'em, by the way. My team tendencies is my field goal kicker cannot kick a field goal. So if I know that it's a tendency that we miss field goals, it's going to impact how we play the game. Does that make sense? The other thing I'm thinking about too is when I'm thinking about the Steelers. So I know Mike Tomlin's record on away games on Thursday night. He usually doesn't fare well on away games on Thursday nights. So when I'm assessing my team and when I'm figuring out if my team is going to win or lose, I'm going to have to look at that tendency to figure out what I think about Mike Tomlin and his ability to win a Thursday night football game. One thing I want to say again here, this is all about filling out little pieces of the pie. Tendencies in the pie is about coaching and players. They have to go hand in hand. You have to know what kind of coach you have, and you also have to know the tendencies of the players you have. You will start to figure out what types of players that you have the more you watch the game. I will use Colorado as an example. I knew for a fact in every single game that I watched of Colorado, Shedeur Sanders was going to have the football and he was going to do something at some point where he was going to turn around and run backwards and spin around and do all those things. Okay, I knew that because that was his tendency. Now, to grade that tendency, that let me know that there was a possibility of a team getting a lot of sacks, or I would have to know that if we played an athletic team, the chances of Shedeur being able to run backwards and spin around and get away were slimmer if we were playing a more athletic team, right? Because I'm understanding my team and I'm understanding my tendencies. You have to understand the negative tendencies of your team, just like you understand the positive tendencies of your team. One of the biggest issues I have with people when they assess their teams is I always say, I don't think they're being honest when they assess their teams. And what I mean by that is they're not being honest with what their eyes are telling them and the tendencies that they see their teams do. They're not being honest that their coach is not good at managing the clock. They're not being honest that your coach's play calling is not good. They're not being honest that your team is not good at running the ball. They're not being honest that your wide receivers aren't very good, because all of these things start to paint a picture. If a guy is dropping the ball and he is a wide receiver, I have to know that that is his tendencies. I can't trust a guy that is not going to be able to catch the ball. If my center is not good at hiking the ball, and usually one or two times during the game, there's moments where we have drives where he just can't hike the football, I have to know that. That is a tendency. We have to start paying attention to tendencies when we are assessing our football teams. I will be honest and say the one thing I learned this season is the tendencies of my teams. The tendencies of my teams helped me to stay sane in a lot of scenarios because I saw a lot of things coming. I knew when Texas lost a game, chances were they were going to come back better in that next game. I also knew that when Colorado was on a bye week, the next game they played concerned me. I also started to realize Colorado wasn't going to run the ball. So if you're not going to run the ball, you can't control the clock, and that means a lot of other things. Sometimes with these tendencies, you have to start to put things together. So for this whole series, I will repeat it again. I think this first tee is the hardest thing to measure because you have to pay attention to what your eyes are telling you, and you have to just understand what's going on. I cheated a little bit. I have a full season of all the things Texas did, all the things Colorado did, and all the things the Steelers did. So for me, it's easy for me to pop out the tendencies because I know them. They're in my head. They're embedded in my head. I understand them. The one thing I will also say too is I know Mike Tomlin. He's been the coach of the Steelers for 16 years now. So I know his tendencies. I know who he is as a coach. I understand some of those things. So I have to watch them. The key is will your coach ever break tendencies? Because when your coach starts doing things that surprise you as a watcher, and when your coach starts to do things that are surprising to you as a supporter of the organization, that is when the game changes a little bit because you're not sure what you're going to get from your team. I will be honest and say a little spoiler alert. Mike Tomlin usually doesn't break tendencies. Steve Sarkisian usually doesn't break tendencies, and Coach Prime usually doesn't break tendencies either. So I've not experienced that a lot. I get it a little bit here and there, but not often. So this is just something to consider. I actually will watch a team play. I will actually take time to go watch teams as it's happening and as it's playing. The reason why I do that is I feel like when I watch film and I slow it down and I analyze, that does nothing for me as a fan and as a supporter. What helps me is to actually go watch them play a real game. So I've said in other videos that I've made throughout the year and in this series, one of the best things that I have for myself is my eye test and trusting what I'm seeing teams do. So if you watch a lot of the videos I had during the season, I would say, I watched this team play and this is what I saw. When I went to watch this team, this is what I saw. When I went to assess this game before I came to my decision, what I did was I looked at stats because I do that, and I watched this team play. And when I did those things, I brought those two things together, filtered them through my football lens, and these are the things that I'm going to be looking out for when I'm watching this team play. Again, very important, because in sports, you don't need to look at all the things that your team does. You need to understand what your team does and what your tendencies are from your team, but you also need to spend time to go see what the other team is doing, because the other team is who you're going to be playing. You're not playing against yourself. You're playing against the other team. So it's very important to see what their tendencies are. A good example with this would be, hey, I just watched this team play. I've been watching them play now for 2 weeks. Every time I watch them play, all they do is create turnovers. If that team is able to create turnovers and my team gives the ball away a lot, Texas, I will be able to say, okay, that is going to be something that I need to pay attention to when my teams meet. So having said all of this, in my football pie, this is very important to me because I believe this is all about the eye test, trusting yourself, and using the knowledge and skills that you have and assessing your football team to determine if your football team is going to win or lose. What are the chances based on the tendencies that you see of your team, the tendencies that you know of your coaching, and the tendencies that you've seen on that team and the tendencies that you've seen on that coaching. Just like everything with this, it's very important to understand where you stand, what your team does, so that you can compare it to another team in contrast. If you cannot, or if you do not compare and contrast your team to another team, you're doing yourself a disservice. It is not all about your team. It is about what the other team can do. If you're following along with me and you're trying to get these little touch points and understand these little nuances of football, this is the tea, this is the tendencies. And like I said, probably in every video at this point, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just things that I do that really help me to understand what to make of my team, to understand how to judge my team. And so for me, in order to make this all make sense, it was important to align every single segment that I look forward to and divide things out so that I make sense, because this is how I assess football. Anything that can impact the game in a weird way that has to deal with coaches and players, not just making the play, but just what you're seeing teams do. It's very important to know. So thank you for watching this tendencies video. This is probably going to be one of my favorites because I feel like this is the one where you have to use your brain and then apply your knowledge. And then if you don't have knowledge, you have to slowly build your knowledge to start to understand. And that is okay too, if that is something that you're doing as you're starting to learn the game of football. So we've all been there. We've all started from somewhere. So now it's just about you building up and building up. Once your team tells you who they are, you kind of have to believe them. They don't get to be somebody else that you want them to be. They are going to tell you who they are. You just have to choose to believe them. So I will end this video here. The next video that I have is going to be another T, and I'm going to talk about all things talent, how I assess talent, how I hope talent shows up when I'm looking at my football teams, and the different ways that I think about talent when it comes to looking at my teams and actually assessing if my team is actually good Because the truth is, without talent, it's debatable to even know if you can win. I guess some people would say if you don't have the best talent, but you have good coaching, good tendencies, and you don't make mistakes, you could potentially win a football game. However, we'll save that convoluted thing for another video. But seriously, the next video is all about talent. So like I've ended every video, this is a to be continued. So I will see you in my next video.